Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be here today. 40 minutes is also very long and somewhat very short to address this point. Carbon isotope in the Earth's number. And so what I made today is that I selected a few things that I think should be discussed. There are things that I will not discuss in much details, and you're supposed to come to me and ask me questions, and we can go in the details of the various things I'm going to address today. I would like to start with something I would call obvious, actually. And the first thing I would like to discuss briefly is I believe it is obvious that carbon isotopes and carbon itself is in steady state in the mantle. What does this mean? It means that the amount of carbon that we do subduct and degas from the mantle are equal on average since 3 billion years. That will be a few slides, and then we will be discussing how carbon isotope could tell us about oxygen fluidicity contrast in the mantle, fluid works interaction, and the possible relationship to recycled carbon. So if you look, the first reference I found was one by Armand Craig in 1962. 62 was basically before plate tectonics. And in 62, Craig looked at the amount of carbonate and organic matter that are sedimented in the ocean. And the flux was so high, he emphasized that we must bring some carbon, most likely from the Earth's mantle, to balance this flux of sedimented carbon. And he said that the amount of carbon we must bring from the mantle through time is so high that we must think of a way to bring it back. And that was before plate tectonics. Okay? And so it's obvious, I believe, that the Earth's surface and mantle massively exchanged carbon since several billion years. And this is actually supported by two independent series of evidence. And I'm going to address that now. But basically, when we think of carbon in the mantle and the surface, it's somewhat a chicken and egg problem. Because I believe the carbon should be understood as being so much cycled between the Earth and the surface that the carbon at the Earth's surface has been probably already 2 times at the Earth's surface before being subjected. Okay? That's why I prefer to use mantle carbon rather than primordial carbon when I discuss about mantle carbon. Okay. The first evidence is brought from the carbon isotope record of carbonate, which are here in red, and organic carbon, which are here in green. Okay? Eric Galimov showed you variation here that are heavily significant here. Okay? I'm not going to question that, it is obvious. But if you look at time average carbon isotope composition of carbonate and organic carbon, you do not see significant trend since at least 3 billion years old. Okay? There are some small perturbations, of course, but again, they are very small. So you have no major secular trend between the two carbon pools in the sedimentary record. If you do the same observation for the Earth's mantle, it is much more difficult, but most samples fall within a narrow range close to -5.8. These include mid-ocean rich basalts and ocean island basalts, which are basically present-day samples. There is variability that we will discuss. These include carbonate from kimberlite, which are typically 50 to several hundred million years. Carbonatite, similar samples. Some of them are here, they show the same distributions. Diamonds that you have seen, again, much more variability. These samples are anyway mostly Archean in age. from the daily. We also have diamonds that are almost present day, they are the edge of the cumulite, so which are very narrow, and diamonds from the lower mantle. We have no age, but they are the deepest. And so when you look at old sample, recent old sample, deep samples, they basically show no circular trend in carbon isotopes. Okay. So what does this mean? It basically means that if you have constant reservoir in terms of carbon isotopes 3 times, either they exchange a lot of carbon and they stay constant, or they don't exchange carbon at all. Okay? And if you want to go in some details, you can think of calculating the residence time of carbon. So the residence time of an element is basically the amount, the size of the reservoir divided by the flux of elements you remove. So from the surface point of view, this is the amount of carbonated sediments. And this is the flux that you recycle into the earth mantle. To calculate the amount of carbon that is subducted is not an easy task. You need to know the amount of carbon you have in the subduction zone minus the flux that is left from the arcs. I will never do this kind of stuff. I think it's really difficult. Okay? There are too little data. Most of the data neglect the occurrence of reduced form of carbon. Actually, Sveta Shilova is here, and she's the one who proved that there is a significant amount of carbon being reduced in the oceanic crust. And there is also a large amount of uncertainties to what happened exactly during subductions. And so it's really hard to get this number. Okay? If you do this calculation like this, you basically find papers suggesting opposite conclusions, suggesting that we subduct more carbon than we do gas or zero. If you assume steady state, then you just calculate it from the flux that is degassed and not subducted. And this we know it. We know it quite well. I will show you a diagram in a minute. And so we end up with a residence time of carbon at the Earth's surface, which is basically 1.5 million years old. It is short enough to argue that this is consistent with steady state. There is some uncertainty, it could be up to 3 million years old, of course. But this is grossly compatible with this hypothesis. So, the carbon at the Earth's surface, assuming steady state, has been already 3 times at the Earth's surface and in the Earth's mantle. We can do the same calculation, at least we can try to do it for mantle carbon. We do the same calculation. This is the mass of carbon, this is the mass of carbon in the mantle, as in sediments, divided by the flux of carbon that is degassed from the Earth's mantle. Okay, and we basically have a residence time that is varying from 2 to 7 billion years old. Okay, so much longer residence time. This calculation is basically easy to do. This amount of carbon in the mantle, is basically depending on the size of the mantle you take. If you take only the upper mantle or the lower mantle, you vary from 2 to 7. So this is basically depending on the size of the Earth's mantle you would like to consider. This actually is only depending on the flux of basalt and the partial melting rate, so you don't do any assumption on the carbon content of the Earth's mantle. It was only being mentioned. So these numbers anyway are too long. Okay? And we can, from this very simple calculation, deduce that some chromotal heterogeneity might exist in the Earth's mantle. It's possible from the long residence time. And also, it's possible that some subduction-related heterogeneity could be preserved given the long residence time. Before going further, I would like to show you a few things. There was a lot of debate 20 years ago on the amount of carbon that was degassed from the Earth's mantle. The most recent studies go towards some agreement. okay, with a flux which is close to 2×10⁻12 mole of carbon per year. And I also would like to emphasize that when we do this kind of calculation, we don't really care about large igneous proteins or oceanal basalts because they contribute heavily to the carbon cycle, at least temporarily, but on the long-term cycle they are negligible. So you can do all this calculation. Again, if you have questions, we can discuss those. But basically, if arc volcanism has very significant impact on climate and on the Earth's atmosphere, on the long-term perspective, it is negligible. So, I think we can definitely understand the carbon cycle between the Earth's mantle and the surface at a steady state. So basically, on the long-term cycle, there is no ingassing or outgassing of the Earth's mantle, and basically they are heavily cycled in equal amount and equal composition. Why do I say that? It's because I completely disagree with the recent paper suggesting that the flux in subduction zones, the budget is zero, and that more goes into subduction zone basically covers the surface. I don't think this is compatible with the sedimentary record of the isotopes. Okay? Again, if you have questions, you can discuss this. And further. I would like now to discuss the heterogeneity in the Earth's mantle. We see carbon isotope variability. It's a difficult subject. I have my opinion, but I'm not yet to tell you what I believe. I would like to show you some evidence that are sometimes consistent and inconsistent. So this is what I call the weak. And the key point, and I'm going to show you some diagram, is basically understanding if this variability that we can see in diamonds, we can see in carbides, we can see in carbonates, etc., basically relate to low temperature. Is it something occurring at low temperature, or which would mean subduction of something that has been produced at low temperature, or what we see in the Earth's mantle could be produced in the Earth's mantle. What we call a mantle process is basically high temperature. We usually attribute it to metasomatism, and I will show you what it is. And I will show you examples. The way we understand this is a diagram from Allegre illustrating chemical geodynamics. Basically, you have heterogeneity in sediments. This is a cartoon illustrating carbon isotope variability. This would be carbonate, this would be organic matter. Okay? You bring carbon from the Earth's mantle, like ocean-rich basalts, ocean island basalts, and they are more or less homogeneous, little variable in carbon isotope composition. Low temperature fractionation occurring in the ocean makes organic matter and carbonate. Those could be mixed in subduction. And when we record diamond, the question is, does this relate to this heterogeneity that was produced at the Earth's surface? When we think of high temperature fractionation, we think of these sediments to be, of course, mixed, but we think of processes occurring within the Earth's mantle that will make this variability. Okay? I go back on the previous diagram, carbon isotope composition, combination with basalts. Most of the values fall around -5, okay? That we typically say this is the mantle value. The question, therefore, is would this value reflect low temperature fractionation, that is carbon from the sediments brought into the mantle, or high temperature fractionation? The same thing for this value, for example, and of course the same thing for this very negative value. The lowest now is -42 per mil, up to +5 per million diamonds. The same thing for diamonds in the lower mantle. Would these values here reflect something that occurs in the Earth's mantle, or was produced at the Earth's surface. Low temperature versus a high temperature. I'm not going to discuss everything. We know from mid-ocean ridge basalts that degassing of CO2, okay, magma degassing CO2, the CO2 is enriched in carbon isotopes, so the residual carbon of this mid-ocean ridge basalt goes in this direction. It's known for decades. There are very nice examples that I will not show you today, but if you're interested, I will give you all the reference. Okay? It's also the case of course using ocean island basalts. In diamonds, we know that we can have also in the Earth's mantle, I will show you examples, decarbonation reactions that will drive the residual carbon towards this direction. We also have evidence that I will not show you today, but again, ask me questions. If you have diamond crystallization from methane, you will go in this direction. Okay? So again, high temperature versus low temperature production. And this is something that was discussed yes, okay. Sorry, excuse me. So what I would like also to go further is dividing diamonds between the two pyrogenesis. So diamonds having inclusions that are similar to peridotite, and diamonds that have inclusions whose composition is similar to peridotite. And we know that the distribution are very different. Okay? All of them are close to -5, but eclogated diamonds show very negative values on average than peridotite diamonds. And it's very tempting to do a mixing to explain those values as a mixing between organic matter and carbonate. And I scaled the carbonate to be, if I mix this with this, I got the -5 values. Okay. So it's very tempting to mix those two, but if you do a mixing of those, of course, you will expect you will count a huge number of values here and not here, so it's bizarre. And we also have, we spoke about diamonds from ophiolites, actually are similar to diamond, to so-called metamorphic diamonds. These diamonds are mostly the ones from the Kokshetau Massif in Kazakhstan that were discovered by our colleagues from Novosibirsk. Okay? So if you look at what might be recycled carbon, like truly subducted carbon here, okay, you get values here, very rare here. If you mix what you have in sediments, it looks somewhat similar. And that was a paper with a very nice title, 1993, Can Diamond, I would say Can Eclogated Diamond be dead bacteria? That was the suggestion. This was actually a paper, it's a short note, and it's a very interesting paper. Okay, so why not? The problem is that if you take sediments and you bring them to 600 degrees C, you almost lost the heterogeneity. Let me go back. This is sediments. At 600 degrees C, the rich carbon here and the carbonate are isotopically re-homogenized. And you lose this variability that would be 40 per minute, is basically disappeared. And you basically have the average fractionation factor. This was shown. The first paper, probably the best, was Vallée and O'Neill 81. This is not very good, but this is the difference between calcite and graphite. And you see a huge variability with, I'm sorry, it's really bad, with unmetamorphosed in sediments. And as you rise the temperature, so you don't increase the temperature towards the amphibolite and the granulite stages, both carbonate and graphite are in equilibrium. And the difference is basically 3 per mil. So the variability you keep at 600 degrees C is 3 per mil. Organic matter being something like -8, carbonate being -5. Okay. So how you can keep this heterogeneity would, in the mantle, would mean that you only subject carbonate on the one hand and organic matter on the other being physically separated. It's hard. If you look in orogenic masses, it's not what you see. Another reason why it is very confusing is because whenever you take ecloglytic diamond and periodic diamond looks the same. I have thousands of data, so I will only show you one diagram. This is a carbon ester composition. And this is the nitrogen ester composition of diamonds. Nitrogen is the main diamond impurity. And I've taken one location, which is the Beerspool in South Africa. And what you see is that ecloglytic diamond in green and periodic diamond in red basically show the same field. If you would make this diamond and this diamond from two different sources of carbon, one would be the osmanthus and one would be recycled carbon, you have no reason to have the same carbon ester composition and exactly the same nitrogen ester field. Okay? In this diagram, organic carbon should be here. Okay? And you see that even the sample showing the low carbon ester composition do not show the so-called positive values that you would expect. Okay? So, what could it be? It could be stabilized top fractionation in the osmanthus. I don't want to say that this possibility, forming diamonds, some diamonds from recycled carbon, is impossible. But most of the time, what we see is a very striking similarity between ecloglytic and periodic diamonds. If they would form from different carbon sources, we should not observe such similarity. So, stabilized top fractionation. So, this is if you do stabilizotopes, this is a famous diagram. If you do not, let me explain. This is the fractionation factors. So this is the fractionation factors, the logarithm multiplied by 10 to the minus 3. This is basically the difference in carbon ester composition between two compounds. Versus temperature, which is expressed as 1 divided by the temperature to the square. This is because in this diagram, the fractionation factors goes almost linear. Okay? This is the fractionation factors related to diamond. So in this upper part, you will find oxidized form of carbon, and in the lowest part, you will find the reduced form of carbon. In other words, CO2 carbonate are enriched in 13C compared to diamonds, which is here. And carbide, methane, carbon monoxide are depleted in 13C isotopes. Okay? If we look at Monthal temperature, where diamond was diamond formed, let's say 1200 degrees C, if you have diamond, which would be -5, the CO2 would be almost +4 per mil. Okay? Same thing, if you have a diamond at 0 per mil, here, -5, let's take a -5, the difference if diamond coexists with carbide would be basically -8 per mil. So at Monthal temperature, -1200 degrees C, if diamond coexists with an oxidized phase, that oxidized phase will be always enriched in 13C isotopes, and it could be depleted if it coexists with reduced forms of carbon. And that may be the reason why we have heterogeneity in the osmanthus. Okay? You might say, well, this is not much because we have 40 per mil of variation in the osmanthus. What I can explain is maximum 8, -8, 2 plus 4. But it's not 40 per mil, which is correct. But let me show you one example. Because random distillation, open system fractionation can of course make large variation, and the best example I've seen is not from me. I wish it was. It was from Dynas in 1968, and he found carbonate in the Monthal xenolite. We speak about a single carbonate peridotite sample. Okay, and some of the sample got values which is here the carbon ester composition, oxygen ester composition of the carbonate. Some samples show the so-called typical Monthal values around S4 and S5 project. Okay? But he found value going, okay, showing a linear relationship up to plus 24 per million. There is nothing looking like this in sediments, right? Showing a linear relationship, okay, and you can use the slope. Let me think. There is no known reservoir going towards such values, so this cannot be mixing. The variation shows a straight line, which is exactly what you expect if it would be an open system fractionation. Okay? It could be mixing if the two end members have exactly the same carbon-oxygen ratios. So it is more likely a relative distillation. The slope is not arbitrary. You can place constraint to deduce the fractionation and the amount of carbon left. Basically, those samples precipitate with 2 per minute of the carbon left from the original reservoir. This is, in my opinion, the first and the best example I have. I think this is also an argument that Eric Galimov used in the past to emphasize the large carbon variability we can. So in one single mantle xenolis, we basically have 30 per minute of isotope variation. Okay? I don't think it can be mixing. It has to be something related to an open system fractionation and high temperature pressure. The reason why a large amount of carbon isotope variability can be made in the Earth's mantle is also because diamonds formed from a mobile phase. Okay? Diamond in the Earth's mantle, or carbide, do not form at solid state. Okay? It is always from a mobile phase, and it is precipitating diamond during oxidoreduction process, like reduction of carbonate or oxidation of methane. Again, a very good example are the so-called fibrous diamonds. Okay? This is a gem quality diamond here. And you can see a coat that is almost opaque, which is full of nanometer size inclusions. And those inclusions are the composition of carbonatites and cubates. And this is the fluid coming precipitating diamond. Another example is if you do X-ray tomography of diamonds, you will see that in the mantle xenolis, diamond is not arbitrarily distributed, randomly distributed in the mantle xenolis, but will always be along veins, like this one. Okay, this is my own interpretation of diamond formation because I did not have an X-ray tomography to show you. And in these veins, they are always enriched in mobile elements. The fact that diamonds grow from fluids is also compatible with the trace element abundance and patterns in silicate inclusions. This is also compatible with the complex internal zoning that the diamond can show. What does it mean? I believe that we have to think, first of all, that the most rock, eplogite and perlite could be pre-existing, and we bring carbon in those rocks. And I would like also to it was supposed to show up, sorry for that. Okay. And also, so I was here. So we have to think of diamonds from a mobile phase during oxidoreduction process that will, for example, precipitate carbonate into diamond. A very important issue, I believe, and I don't think it's been much investigated through experimental petrology, is that the different rock will have different effects on the fluid. This is a paper by Louvre, and this paper may not be so easy to, this figure may not be so easy to understand, but I got it from the following. First of all, if you look at peridotite composition, okay, the stability of peridotite diamond is basically confined between these two curves. paper was used to emphasize that the field where eclomatic diamonds are stable is larger, and was used to explain why we have more eclomatic diamonds than periodic diamonds. I've been quoting this paper because of this reaction here, where the data shows that in eclogites, the carbonate can also be decarbonated to produce CO2 and rich phases. Okay? This reaction cannot exist in peridotite because the olivine is buffering the reaction, so you always have carbonate in the peridotite. So what does this mean? It means that in an eclogite, you could have a carbonate-bearing fluid can be decarbonated and make some C isotope heterogeneity because the fractionation factor between CO2 and carbonate is significant. This reaction will not occur in a peridotite, and therefore it might be compatible with the homogeneity of carbon isotopes. I think it's consistent with most of the observation. What I would like to say is it's mostly consistent with the observation, but there are almost no experiments doing the same thing we've been saying, and the amount, the chemical variabilities of the fluids, etc., that could be existing and reacting is basically a little study. So this is one suggestion. There may be many more. What I would like to go further is I have no answer. So we go in the very weak part of this presentation, but I'm here to talk to you and emphasize what might be a possibility. Experimental petrology tells us that below 250 degrees C, the Earth's mantle is getting very reduced, and there should be free iron metal present, and the oxygen fugacity should go down and drop. So there could be carbide. Okay. And if there is carbide, the fractionation factors between diamond and carbide is really significant and could be up to 10 to 1. And it's possible, we don't know, it might be the reason why when we have diamonds coming from the transition zone, why we have large carbon isotope position. Okay. There are few data available, but if you look at diamonds from South Africa, Sao Luis, and Can-Can, the few samples that are available cover a huge range of composition. I do not know if it is related to subduction or whether we have to think in terms of stable isotope fractionation because the oxygen fugacity is so low that the isotope fractionation factors are getting too very significant. Again, if you have questions about that, I would be happy to discuss. And I would like to end up. Do I have? I'm still on time. Yeah. No.
No time, unfortunately, here.
Do you want to stop now?
Yes, I think so. I think that we will have time for discussion because it's extremely interesting.
Yeah. No, so I'm finishing. So I wanted to show you a few slides about oxygen isotope in diamond inclusion to show you some inconsistencies that I've seen in the literature, but I will not. And I will end up with those conclusions, which are summarized here, and so we have time to take a few questions. I'm done.
I'm optimistic. I think we have time for a couple of questions. Okay, please.
In the beginning of your talk, you mentioned about the important driver for the carbon input to the sorption and the subduction. This is very important feedback mechanism between sink and input of carbon. And sometimes should be responsible for the climatic change on Earth. And such a record is widely available. Are there any attempts to find a correlation between these two mechanisms?
I don't know if I can easily answer this question. My view is that in my understanding, the CO2 content of the atmosphere is basically buffered by some sort of vapor pressure effect from the dissolved carbonate in the ocean. That would regulate the long-term CO2 content of the atmosphere, which is itself dependent on temperature. When you speak about volcanoes, what you mentioned, right? You mentioned about these only ocean numbers and arc volcanism will have an effect on the direct effect on and short-term effect on the climate because they erupt in the atmosphere. Most of the flux of the CO2 from the Earth's mantle is degassed within the ocean because it is seafloor eruption, and therefore doesn't have a short-term effect on the climate. I know that people from Harvard, they try to model the variation of melt productivity and gassing and related to climate, but I'm not sure they reached I'm not sure they can establish the evidence you mentioned. So to answer you, I don't think that we can really establish the correlation that you're emphasizing. Okay. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
More or less, I understand that it's very difficult to distinguish between different efforts.
Yeah. I also would like to ask you, you accept the steady state condition for the carbon, but for instance, the intensity of carbonatites increased dramatically in the Earth's history. So it means that some kind of flux of CO2 or just increase, not constant as you told.
Okay,
What
so
do you think about that?
So your point is, if we look at the abundance and the age of carbonatites through time, we see that there is no continuous record. But can you really have representative pictures of carbonatites
Oh, yes.
through time?
Yeah.
I mean, from simply that are we not biased by what we can observe?
No, I believe that definitely carbonatite activity increased dramatically.
Okay. But if we look at the amount of carbonatites through time, the amount of carbon is still negligible compared to what comes from subduction to some mid-ocean reach. Even the big large News province have a significant role because they erupt very quickly. But on the long-term basis, they are negligible compared to the mid-ocean province. So carbonatite should be negligible as well. It is one part, but it is a few percent.
Yeah. No more questions. Thank you very much. So.